All right, welcome. So far what we've got here is a little game that doesn't do much at the moment. We've got our little player here. We've got some blocks that fall around. If you wanted, you could spend some time pushing these around and building them. And there's a lot more mechanics to make a great game that we need so far. But one thing I am starting to notice is that it's actually hard to sometimes see where things are because everything is exactly the same color. And one of the features of a great 3D game is that we have these amazing environments which we can build and that we can kind of play with. So I would like to spend a bit of time, first of all, making this thing look just a little bit better so that we can get some visual appearance here to our game. And we've got several layers that we can use. And I want to show you the most basic first, and then we'll get it more and more complicated as we go along. So the first thing I'd like to look at is the floor. Just maybe I get a little more contrast between the objects and the floor here. So in 3D, basically we create these things called meshes that we've mentioned, and a mesh can be a cube or it can be a sphere or it can be a much more complicated shape like a player or a tree or whatever you want. But essentially it's just the housing or the outline of the object itself. And what we can do in order to change the appearance of this is to add a material. To make this, instead of being out of this white plain material, we can make a more interesting material. So for the floor, I'm going to click on the mesh instance, and then over here you can see that mesh. It's using the default boring kind of ivory white material here. And just down below, there's a little drop down where it says material. And right now you can see that that is empty because we are using just the default one that Godot comes with, but we can create our own. And if we click on that where it says empty here, we get to add a couple options. Um, a a shader material or a spatial material. Now, for our purposes, we're going to start off with spatial materials. Shader materials are amazing and do some very cool things, and they interact with each other really nicely, but they tend, tend to be a little more complicated, so we're going to start off with a spatial material here. And if I make a new spatial material, you can see up comes this the default we have actually for Godot, which is this plain white material here. And if I scroll down, you can see there's a crazy number of parameters and different things that we can tweak to create the exact material that we want. Now these are called based on something called PBR, physics-based rendering, and essentially it was developed by Disney and Pixar to this whole system to create realistic materials in a digital world so that light would play off of them in a realistic way. So there's some real specific ideas here as far as physics goes, and I've got a more in-depth tutorial that you can check out in the enrichment section. Um, but for now, we're just going to use the basics. So the first thing I want to do is just change the color. And for color, as far as you are used to it, is something called albedo in this setup here. And so if I drop that albedo down, you can expand it a little bit here. You can see you get two options of color and texture. Albedo is more than just color, but it's kind of, think of it as our base. So I'm going to set the color here, and the most easy thing we can do is just choose a new color on the color picker here. So if I click that color, you can see that we can make that color really anything that we want in any shade or hue. You can get the exact thing you want. I'm going to make a nice kind of rich green here for my ground, and you know, you could leave it at that if you want a pretty basic game. We could just play our game here, and now we have a nice green background that we can play off of. And now you can see that the boxes and the player really kind of stand out, and it's a lot more interesting there. So I could go in, and if I wanted to, I could also go into the player and I could choose their mesh instance. You can see that the material slot here is empty, and I can add a new material to this guy if I wanted. In fact, I'll do that, a new spatial material for my player. And if I wanted to, I could also, you know, pick a color for that, and I could make the player a different color. But let's go beyond that. And I'm going to just set that back to white. The next option here is the texture. And a texture is quite a bit more complicated as well. We can add lots of different options there. But what I'm going to do is actually just load a picture as a texture to start. Now this can often look a bit terrible, but it'll at least give us an idea of how to make this work. And to do that, I am just going to grab a picture, but I don't have one. Notice here's all of my slots and my things. And I guess I've got the icon here. I could use this picture if I wanted to. Yeah, let's give it a go. I'm going to use this icon one here, and so I'm just going to drag this over into the texture slot, and you can see that the Godot face, the Godot head, gets wrapped around there. And if we were to play my game now, if I save this scene, I go back and play my game, you can see that we now have this this player head there. But maybe I want to bring in my own one. Notice it's just hovering around. I can pull it to the side. You can kind of see the player there. But you also want to know how you could grab your own. Now, if you've done Godot before, you know you can just bring something into your folder. But if you haven't, let's go and download something. And in fact, I've already downloaded a little clown face here that I'm going to just open up. I'll show you there. I've just got this little clown nose and some glasses that I'm going to use. And so find that from the internet. It could be a JPEG, could be a PNG, could be any kind of picture you like. You could use your own social media picture or whatever. And I'm just going to copy that. And then this needs to go into your game folder, not the Godot folder, but your game folder. So mine was called 3D game here. I'm going to open that up. Oh, no, it wasn't. It was in Documents, and it was called 3D Game. There we go. Here are all of the objects in my game so far. There's my project, the player script, the player scene, the level 1, that icon we did. And what I've just done is made a folder. You can just right-click and make a new folder here called Materials. You're going to see things are going to get really, really complicated with lots of different files here. So it's nice to start off a little bit more organized. So I made a folder called Materials, and I'm just going to paste that clown face picture in there. And when I switch back to Godot, you're going to see that in a second. Come on, in a second. Let me pause this while this window popped up while I paused it there, saying re-importing assets, and you can see now in my materials folder there is that clown. Just took a minute for Godot to register that a new file had been added, but it'll bring it in for you, and now I've got this clown picture, and you could grab any picture off the internet that you wanted to be able to make this work. And now I can go into my player, and instead of the Godot head, if I wanted that texture, I'm going to grab this clown head and bring that over there, and you can see that the clown has now been added. It's really quite distorted, so we'll talk about how to fix that later, and we'll talk about better pictures, but I wanted to just to work with this just so you could see it. And if we play my game now, I've got this little clown head in as my player. It's quite a bit distorted. Notice it doesn't move like I would expect it to. If this was the shape, I would expect this ball to roll, and I think that's what we should have a look at to be able to create a better looking object and be able to use these textures to the advantage. Just give me some dynamic movement. So let's get into some scripting now that I have a picture applied to my graphic that we can actually make this work and look at it a little bit better. I'm going to go into my player here, and now that I've got this picture on, I'm going to tweak some things in the coding a little bit. And let me just widen this up a little bit so we can see everything. So at the moment, right now, my player is just moving. It's being translated in the X, Y, or X and Z direction as I move around here. But really when I move, I would like to have this look more like a ball, more like it's going to roll. So what I would love to do is to be able to rotate um, as I move around. So let's try this in one particular direction. Well, sure, let's go for the right here. So in addition to this moving, I actually want to spin and rotate. Now, if I open up the player and go back to this 3D world here, you can see that if I were to grab this, I can actually rotate the player, and you can see as we go around here, it's rotating and it's going to roll kind of in that natural way. So if I could somehow control that, which I can in code, um, and I'm going to bring up the transform here, you can see. So as I rotate around here, we got this rotation degrees here, which allows me to roll around like so. I can actually code this, and I can access any of these properties that are over here from within the player's code. And the the script is on the player. Now, I don't actually want to rotate the player. I just want to rotate the mesh that's inside of it. And if you've done this from Godot 2D, then you'll remember this feature. But if not, then if you're brand new to Godot in 3D, we can access any child, any element any node that is underneath another node by using the $ here. So if I type $ in the script's on the player, and it'll come up with any of the children there. So I want to manipulate the mesh instance. So I'm going to grab this mesh instance. So $ mesh instance means now I'm changing the properties of not the player, of not this kinematic body, but of the mesh there. Period. And you can see that up comes a whole host of all of these different properties that can be changed. And there are loads of them, any property and any function that is available for here. And I wanted the rotation or rotate. And let's think about this here. I am moving currently in the X direction. So if I switch back to this view here, if I think about this, I'm moving in the X direction, which is my red direction here, which means I'm going to rotate around or roll this way. So I'm going to rotate around the Z. So switching back to my script there, I want to rotate in the Z axis. Rotate Z here. And what I've got here is an angle. So let's say, oh, I don't know, let's try 5 degrees or something like that. So I'm going to type 5 and see how this works. So if I press the right, I'm going to rotate 5 degrees along the Z axis for that mesh instance. And let's play this and see how it looks. Now it's only doing it for the right at the moment, but let's go. Well, there we go. We are rolling along, but wow, that seems really, really fast. Notice the other direction is not doing anything yet. I haven't programmed that. But just a tiny little tap, you can see that doesn't look like 5 degrees to me. That looks like it's just spun around like 10 times or something like that. That's kind of going to be problematic. So let's fix that issue. And you may be inclined to do smaller, like I could do 1 degree, and if I play, you'll see that you would expect it to go slower, but it's actually still spinning crazy fast. And the reason for that is that if you're in grade 12, you may have done 2 different ways of measuring angles. At the moment, we are assuming this is 1 degree because that's what we use, but actually most coding and most programming uses what's something called radians. And if you haven't got there in your Math 12 yet, then don't worry about it. Just realize that radians is another way of measuring angles rather than degrees. And you'll get to that a little bit later. So what I need to know is that when I'm doing this rotation, it's doing it in radians, which is a totally different measurement system that you might not be familiar with. Luckily, you don't have to worry about it. We have a function that will translate for us called rad 2 degrees, or radians 2 degrees. And oh, but I actually want to go the other way. I'm going to type in degrees because that's what I'm familiar with. So I'm going to say deg to rad, degrees to radians. So I don't have to worry about how it works. I just need to know that if I want 5 degrees, that this function is going to translate it into radians for me and be more appropriate. So if I'm going to go 5 degrees now, let's try that. And oh, I'm going backwards here, which is totally fine. But so my right is actually the opposite direction there, but that looks a lot better as far as speed spinning around there. So in fact, it looks like if I'm rotating, I actually want to go in the -5 degrees. And there's no particular, well, there's some math, but it's pretty complicated math for it here. To make this look realistic, though, you probably just want to figure out, is that, and having done this before, as I roll, it looks like I am spinning about the same direction that I should be moving. You could play around with those numbers. If you wanted to say, well, 25 degrees. So as I go along, you can see that I'm spinning clearly a lot faster than I'm moving, so it doesn't look very realistic. The 5 degrees might have been a little bit slow, so maybe I'll go -7. And you can just kind of play with the numbers there to get exactly what you would like in order to create the illusion that you're rolling along there. That looks pretty good to me. Now the backwards is not moving at all in the right direction, so we're not getting a rotation, so that I can just steal this idea and I'm going to copy it and say, well, when I'm moving to the right, I'm moving -7, and when I'm moving to the left, I'm going to rotate in +7 degrees. Now moving down, this is in the movement in the Z direction, so if I go back to here, if I think about moving in the Z direction, that means I need to spin around that axis, so that is my X. And so if I go back into the script there, where the movement is 7, and again, I may have to play with this, but I'm going to rotate in the X direction. And I'm just going to assume that this is the correct one. I'll do +7 and -7. Change that to the X. Now I may have to flip these, but I think the best way of figuring out is just to try it out there. Oh, let's not play the player. Let's play level 1 here. And you'll hopefully get this much more realistic looking spinning. No, I'm backwards. There, left and right look fine, but I just have to change the positives and negatives. Or you could have some kind of like backspin pool game there, but let's go. That should be 7, and that should be -7. As I said, you could do a whole bunch of figuring and looking at the different angles, but sometimes it's just easier to try it and see if you've picked the right ones. There we go, and now we have this roly-poly ball, which actually looks like it's moving around and is connecting with my objects. Obviously, the face is not really well done, but we'll have a look at, because it's kind of wrapped around in a very strange way. We'll have a look in the next lesson on how to pick some better ones and get some even more realistic ones.